All right, everybody, welcome. It's the third Wednesday of the month. That means it's time for the Kubernetes office hours. This is the live stream where we take as many questions as we can from the Kubernetes community and have this awesome panel of experts try to answer as many of them as possible. We do this every month on the third Wednesday. We have two sessions. We had one this morning that was more time friendly for the Europeans, and this one is the West Coast edition, as we like to call it. So we have two sessions a month. Just a heads up, this June, we're also going to have an additional session for Ingress um, networking and stuff. And we're going to have guests from SIG Networking. It's going to be great. Pierre, did we solidify a date? We have a date we penciled in a date. But we'll just paste that into the Slack channel there. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we begin, let's start by introducing ourselves. Let's go Marky, Mario, Pierre, Samu, and then the bot doesn't have to introduce itself.
Hello, everybody. This is Marky Jackson. I am part of SIG Release as one of the release associate managers. Happy to be here. Thanks everybody else for being here.
Hey everybody, my name is Mario Loria. I've done many of these before, so nice to see everyone who's participated and come back. I work for StockX in downtown Detroit, Michigan. I work mostly in cloud, mainly AWS EKS, but I've delved elsewhere as well in GKE. Most of my focus is around ingress, auto scaling, deployments, packaging, definitely cluster optimization, things like that. So look forward to your awesome questions today. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Pierre. I'm a senior software architect at Spectrum. I'm mainly focusing these days on all cloud native things, basically Kubernetes. My focus is also currently on AWS EKS. Previously, a lot of AKZ from Azure. And yeah, basically all things automation, Kubernetes, Prometheus, alert manager, everything that belongs to it. That's about it. That's me.
Hey guys, this is Vamshi Samudrala from American Airlines. Been working with Kubernetes for about quite time now, and joined this awesome community and part of SIG Contribex and SIG marketing team, and working on some internal projects. Other than that, but majorly working on Azure AKS, IBM IKS, and on-prem Kubernetes clusters. And open to any questions, and let's get on that.
All right. And I'm George Castro. I work at VMware as a Kubernetes community manager, and I'm the host of the Shindig. So before we get started, we're going to go over some ground rules, and then I kind of tell you how it works. So this is a Kubernetes event. So the code of conduct is in effect. Please be excellent to each other in the Slack channel, which if you're watching the YouTube stream is on the right here. This is also a judgment-free zone. Everyone had to start from somewhere. There's no dumb questions. So feel free to just ask whatever you need to do to get your thing working for work. And while we will do our best to answer your questions, the panel does not have access to your cluster, nor do we want it. So live debugging is off topic, so we can't necessarily like SSH to your thing and fix it. But what we can do is help share our expertise and best practices to maybe at least get whatever your next step is more clear on what you need to do to solve your problem. Panelists, you're encouraged to expand on answers with your experiences and pro tips, especially your production ones. That's part of the reason we like to have production people on here, is kind of share the goodies, outside of the home. Like I have my experience with my home lab at Kubernetes, and it's totally different from those of you running Kubernetes in anger. Audience, you can help us out by pasting URLs to the official docs, blogs, GitHub tools, or anything that might be relevant to the topic at hand. So usually what happens, someone asks a question, we read it, and then someone starts to answer it, or maybe the panelists take turn answering questions. And while that's happening, those of you who have the expertise in this area, feel free to just start to whack URLs into the chat. Those will get shown on the YouTube stream. And then what I do at the end of the stream is collect them all together and publish those as show notes. Those URLs are awesome. I think we learn of a new tool every time we do it. So it's just a fantastic way to help spread the knowledge, so that someday when someone runs into this video and it's covering a topic that they care about, they'll have reference materials available from the community, and we love that. You can also feel free to just start posting your questions right now in hash office hours. The instructions are down here below. If you've never been in the Kubernetes Slack, just go to slack.kits.io, follow the instructions, and join the hash office -hours channel. You can also post your questions on the Kubernetes forums at discuss.kubernetes.io. And that is one of the places where I do publish all the notes as well. And I will post those in the Slack channel today after everything's done and we've done curating all of the URLs and all that good stuff. You can also help us out by tweeting, spreading the word, paying it forward, helping somebody out. Anything that you could do to help spread the knowledge of Kubernetes is always appreciated. And this panel is made entirely of volunteers. So if you want to rotate in, please let us know. We love to have new people rotate in and out. You just say, hey, I'm available for these sessions. And the week before, I ping you, and we have enough people on staff to hopefully staff one of these things. It is a great way to give back to the community. Speaking of giving back, I'd like to thank Giant Swarm, StockX, Pivotal, Spectrum, Pusher.com, Weaveworks, VMware, University of Michigan, Red Hat, Utility Warehouse, American Airlines, and Microsoft for letting their engineers come hang out and spread the wealth. And as always, a special thanks to the CNCF for sponsoring the t-shirt giveaway. So if I ask your question live on the air, we will automatically put you in a little rally to win a snazzy Kubernetes t-shirt, which none of us are wearing today. And then, so we give away 2 of those. But you have to wait till the end of the show for when we do the raffle, and you have to be present to win. So let's do that. And for that, we have questions. How are we sounding there? It looks like the chat's already buzzing and talking. Feel free to say hello in chat, where you're from in the world, what you're working on, where you're working on. We're always interested in that kind of stuff. So in the meantime, let's start with our first question. It comes from Nerdy Sean, who asks, I've got a storage class that I initially set with the reclaim policy equal delete. Trying to edit the resource to retain doesn't seem to work. Do I need to recreate the class then, or am I doing something wrong? Dead silence. Let's give everyone a minute here to consume this one. Mario looks like he's either thinking very hard or very confused. Any thoughts on? We can come back to this one if it's.
I'm actually answering a different one. I think.
Okay.
Are you on the storage class one?
Yeah, I'm on the storage class one.
Okay. Yeah, I am not the right person to answer that. So hopefully someone else with more storage experience can do that.
I would ask if there is already something bonded to that, or set for binding. If there's already something binded to that particular to that storage class, like do you have PVs and PVCs already set up? That may create a problem. I'd also be interested to know what version Kubernetes cluster you were on.
So Nerdy Sean, if you are listening live and you want to follow up with giving us more information, that will be fine. We can.
Adding to that, yes. And when you're trying to edit the resource to retain it doesn't. I don't think it works. You just need to recreate the class with it and then try to do it again. I don't think it will try to, because once you have created the storage class, if there are any other things that are straightly using it, and that is attached to the storage class, any person or person volumes that are already using it, I don't think it will allow you to edit it. So either you create a new storage class and try to get what you're trying to achieve, or otherwise it's just but the existing ones, if there are other connections or other labels that are trying to connect to it, I don't think it will allow you to edit.
Awesome. Any other opinions here? I don't think they're listening live on this one, so we can come back to this one if anyone has future thoughts. All right, moving on. Tim Hunter asks, what approach would you take to a large jump update of the Kubernetes version? We run bare metal clusters that are still on 1.13.x and are ready for an update. I recently read a recommendation that clusters should be rebuilt from scratch from situations like this, transferring data with something like Valero. Any other recommendations?
I think that, yeah, you definitely should. I would try to start from a new cluster and migrate data over. One thing I will say is if you do not choose to go that route and you love pain, make sure you don't update going from 1.13 to 1.18. You need to go one major version at a time.
Doesn't kubeadmin force you to do that? At least on bare metal. Yeah, right.
I guess, and this comes from a cloud provider space, but I guess some tidbit. You still have to, with the control plane, go one at a time. even in cloud land. But the nice thing is you can have your nodes and your control plane off by 2 minor versions. So you can have a control plane that's 116 and have nodes that are running 114. And so I guess consider that. So what what I just recently did is I took us to 115 on the control plane from 113, technically around 112. But I took the control plane as high as I could go, and then incrementally when I was ready, made a plan to get the node groups taken care of, which makes it a lot easier because the node groups are the bulk of the work, I would say, especially if you have data and other things like that. So definitely like move the needle as far as you can from a control plane perspective. Obviously consider things with the 116, consider the deprecated APIs and things like that. Definitely read the deprecations from the change log. The change log is like, you should be laser-eyed on that if you're an operator. But yeah, definitely control plane the node groups. So
let me get the change. Mario, while I move on to the next question, can you grab the change log URL for the website and toss that in? That would be great. Yeah, I would say, if you're upgrading in place, let's say you're 113, you go to 1.14. Every time you make a jump, there's like new deprecated APIs, and it feels like you got to rip the Band-Aid off, right? Like, because you're going to have to test all your because that's such a major difference. It feels like if you're testing at each step of the upgrade, you're just make the pain happen 4 times in a row. Whereas if you just recreate the new cluster, see if your stuff runs, and then you fix that, you at least have you go through the pain once as opposed to incrementally doing a lot of work for a version that you're not going to stay on for the upgrade. So yeah. Any other upgrade, just random question. Do any of you even do in-place upgrades?
I have in the past. It's not fun.
Okay.
Especially if you try to do a large jump.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
like
definitely on cloud.
Go ahead, Mario. It's fine.
I was gonna say, yeah, in as I was talking before, yeah, we have with EKS, and I have to say EKS at least makes it quite easy. I know GKE actually has it automated, and they just introduced surging as well. And like, just think about your upgrades being completely automated. I mean, you still need to worry about some of the workloads and APIs and other deprecations of tools and things like that, but like for the most part in GKE, it's automated. EKS is a little bit more work. EKS ETL makes it a lot easier though. So from an in-place upgrade perspective on cloud, I think that problem is pretty much solved. Still things you want to consider and test and whatnot.
Yeah, for me, like the last few updates that I did, I tried to redo the clusters all the time from scratch and verify that everything is working before. So, but I have done in-place updates or upgrades before, and it works, but it's just like too much of a hassle, and it also gives you like some kind of training to recreate your cluster on a semi-regular basis. So,
do any of you? I should have clarified for major point releases. What about minor point releases? Do you just in place upgrade those, or Mario? I'm assuming you just let the cloud provider do that for you for the minor point releases.
Minor point releases, yeah, we actually generally don't really worry about those too much. What ends up happening with the EKS ETLs, we're locked into the AMI, which is locked into a certain patch version generally. So yeah, we don't really touch patch versions because those are considered updates as well, and we don't bother with those. We're just trying to right now, like I'm basically in like every 6 months, I'm looking at like, should we seriously consider based on the timelines upstream, based on what EKS is made available, etc. So yeah.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. All right. Anything else about upgrades, Tim? I hope that helps you out. Next, we have a question from Meowsis. I hope I pronounced that right. Sorry. Anyone running Kubernetes at home? What kind of storage do you recommend using? NFS, iSCSI, HostPath? What's the most suitable for this kind of workload? I am trying my hardest not to run Kubernetes at home, but I'm failing hard at that. I'm actually, me personally, I'm doing a single node Kubernetes home because I don't want like 5 machines on or whatever. Just curious for the kind of like lab environment, what storage you all recommend? I have machines with big disks. But it does sound like NFS is being used regularly.
Yeah, I used Rook with Ceph for some time, for example. So I have a 3-node Raspberry Pi setup at home, but I'm not super the home lab guy. I just spin up a new instance in the cloud whenever I need it and shut it down. So that's how I do it, like 90% of the time.
Yep. Yeah, so just a quick follow-up from Tim says, thanks, guys. I'll definitely read and communicate the change log. So at the very least, I'll be able to tell the developers I told you so. A plus. Restoring the PVC PVs, especially those with production data, seems like the biggest stress. So I wanted to go back for this question specifically to ask, how do you deal with that specifically? Are there any things you can recommend?
I think, but again, managing the storage, moving PVs and PVCs is like what is that you're trying to use for the percent volume? Is it like something like Ceph, or that is outbound solution, which is by default giving you a replication, and in case if you lose data, there's like high availability and everything. So if it is those kind of tools like Ceph, anything which you're using, it's like a third party tool that will literally help you out.
Any other recommendations? All right. Well, good luck with your first Ceph cluster then. No, I'm just kidding. So in my brain, I'm sitting there, I'm wondering, now I've got, it's running your own little Ceph cluster and all that. That's also not trivial, right?
Oh yeah, I mean running your Ceph
Yeah.
cluster very small is not trivial. That's why
Yeah.
it should be an enterprise solution where you're trying to get it, and running your storage as with the replication and everything that is being for an enterprise. If you're running your production load on this and making your person volume like database, if you're running it, then
Yeah.
definitely you need to have some third party solution which is giving out of the box features, everything that's
Yeah.
taking care of the data. So because that data is the main thing, because PV and PVCs is just like a pipe that is talking to your data, right? You're not storing it anywhere. Where the actual location of data you're storing is important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is exactly the reason why I don't run databases and Kubernetes and stuff. So I just try to avoid this at all. Like, don't run. Like for me, I know you can, and a lot of people do, and we have this blog post that we share quite frequently in this round, but about running databases and Kubernetes. But for me, I just don't bother. Like I keep my Kubernetes clusters as simple as possible.
So you try to keep as little amount of stateful stuff in there.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
So there's just like a super minimal amount that is actually stateful that is in there. But yeah, in general.
Yeah, and Q mentions, it's not an option for us. We have hundreds of databases in Kubernetes. So yeah, that's a thing people need to manage. All right, so let me see if anybody else has some recommendations here in chat. So that site is relnotes.cates.io. You definitely want to subscribe to that. One of the nice things about that, those of you who've never used the site, is you can narrow it down per SIG, per release. There's like nice little filters on there. So you could say, what am I running right now? Boom, boom, boom. What am I running in dev? Boom, boom, boom. And then kind of like compare where you're at there with the changes. So definitely an awesome site. Let's see. And Q mentions that, the moving and restoring the PVC PVs is their biggest stress, especially when a Helm release won't load anymore because of some strange spec change and you're stuck doing it. Ouchies. So, Mario, you look like you've experienced this with the look on your face. So, all right.
No, I have not. I know. I feel the pain though.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. Anything else on storage? Tim, I hope that helps you out. If you have any follow-up questions, keep on typing. Next question comes from Amir. Thanks for joining us. As cluster IP service type in Minikube, I have a microservice and I have a Helm chart to deploy it. There's a service defined for it, as well as exposes a port for UDP packets. This works well in a proper Kubernetes cluster. I can see the service using kube control. I can also see that under the hood, the IPVS is properly configured on the worker node. I can ping the service IP from within the pod. Unfortunately, this doesn't work well when I do a Helm install in my local testing environment that uses Minikube. I can list the service using kubectl, get services, but beyond that, nothing works. I can't ping the service IP from within the pod, and I realize that I don't have IPVS installed. So how does Minikube implement services under the hood? Do services work better in microK8s or any other variant for local testing? Opinions here.
I would say port forwarding, and I put a sort of a pseudo command that the user can use. Try that out. He also, or the person is also referencing that the Helm chart. He thought the Helm chart should take care of that. I did ask for a link to that Helm chart so I could sort of see what the values look like
Right.
and go from there. But I would
Okay.
first start with doing just a port forward, and I put in the Slack in a thread what the
Awesome. I see
command they
that.
could run.
Thanks. And then obviously, if you have the Helm chart, you could just inspect to see if it does that for you, right?
Yeah, and what about I mean, Maki, what do you think about having like running it as a node port? I mean, the service is already there, like rather than exposing a port and then just running it as a node port and then exposing your service or
If you're doing local development, I would totally do that. Make it super easy. Don't
yeah,
need to rethink it for local development.
yeah, so yeah.
Mm. Any other opinions? D. Bentley, welcome to the show, says for a lot of things we found that using kind is also a great cluster. +1. Anything else here? I think that's the best we could do since we can't see the Helm chart, but it seems like a good place to start. All right, moving on. Nathan, welcome to the show. Says if you're currently using Helm and starting a move to customize, is there anything that you feel Helm is better than customize? For example, perhaps Elasticsearch for Helm and customize for your custom services. Any opinions here?
So I have not used Customize. I've heard a lot about it. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that if I see something that isn't a Helm that has its own Helm chart already, so like Elasticsearch, I'm fairly confident there's already a Helm chart for it. Whether that's officially from Elastic or in their main like Helm stable charts repository, which is super helpful. If that exists, that gets me further than trying to figure out doing that same thing for Customized, right? Depending on it, with what YAMLs are out there and what blog posts I might be reading. For the most part, those stable charts are fairly up to date, and this depends on the people that are doing, running the service or the vendor that created the service, etc. But I almost always am using those as a starting point. So this is really like depending on the upstream project that you're trying to leverage and the customizations that you want to make to it, which for the most part, the Helm chart is either flexible enough or you can fork it and make it flexible fairly quickly. I'd say Helm is going to make the most sense. For your own applications, though, Customize might make a lot of sense. So you'd want to weigh it on that side of things. So hopefully someone who has more customized experience can weigh in as well.
Yeah, Kelly Ferroni adds, I use Helm with Customize in -- post render to patch charts that don't have the features I want. Sorry, I interrupted someone. Didn't mean to.
That's exactly what I've done. I've used Helm and for very customized, or lack of a better phrase, customized applications, then using Customize with that to do the overlays works like a charm. And if you wrap that up in a bash file, makes it even easier.
All right. Any other tips here? Keep the questions coming, everyone. We're almost caught up to the queue, so keep on asking. Q says multiple Helm charts for Elasticsearch, although they are challenging for a variety of reasons. But yeah, you're saying what I was thinking. If it's stable, try to work with it and use custom services for Customize. Appreciate you, Mario. I have a follow-up question for you, Mario, since you are a heavy consumer of Helm. You had mentioned that you use, say, Elasticsearch with your Helm chart, but I've also seen people do operators for Elasticsearch. How do you pick what pattern you're going to use? Or is it just like we're a Helm shop, I want to keep everything as Helmed as possible?
Great question. Yeah. So I personally prefer an operator. However, the operator needs to be well developed and well maintained for me to adopt it. And I don't even think we're running any operators right now, but there's a couple that I just haven't got a chance to really deep dive test and get implemented. But I think operators are a great pattern moving forward. And I think the operators really take a lot of stress off of my head. Because once you Helm install, you're kind of hands off. You don't know what's going on. You don't know life cycle. Upgrading is like a whole new thing 8 months later, and you're like, is the chart version updated? What would things look like before? I still want these configuration options, or there's more that you have to deal with. I think an operator makes all that a lot more streamlined and easy to digest, especially long term throughout the life cycle of whatever you're trying to run. So I would say, like for Elasticsearch, if there's an operator, start looking at that operator, and is it been committed to recently? Does it seem to have a lot of configuration options that you're looking for? The Operator Hub from Red Hat, operatorhub.io, is basically your go-to source for what operators are kind of out there. I believe there's a couple GitHubs out there as well that link some. So take a look, and a lot of the services that you're seeing, like Bonsai Cloud, for instance, has an HPA operator, and you can say, I want a default HPA for all these services, and using annotations enable that, and the operator takes care of it for you. So I love that model. I think it's getting a lot better moving forward, and we're starting to see a lot more applications. You can just scroll through the operator hub and see that there's a ton of cool stuff. One of them related to horizontal pod autoscaling is a KEDA project that just got into the CNCF, which lets you scale on things like AWS SQS queue size, right? Which is super cool. And having a operator, I mean, it kind of takes care of handling the deployment daemon sets, other objects for you, so you don't have to worry about the Helm chart doing that. So
Interesting. All right, and that last thing you mentioned, I didn't grab a link for it and toss it in Slack. You mentioned a GitHub project, but I didn't. It wasn't clear to me in the audio.
The key thing is the operator hub. I'll do a little bit of searching here and
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Next question comes from Juan. It says, "Hey there. How can I schedule different pods and different nodes by metrics? For example, I don't want more than 3 pods in the same node. I don't want to use a daemon set. Please help me. I have a lot of night without sleep." Haha. All right. Any recommendations here?
Generally, it's just that the pod affinity which you go with, right? I think someone has answered already on Slack, but it's just that with the pod affinity, which you're gonna define, like how many pods you wanted on the node, or how you want it to be.
Yeah, this seems pretty straightforward. Any recommendations?
I actually answered that. I actually believe I answered that one in a thread, and I just linked to the affinity and anti-affinity stuff. There's some fairly standard models for doing that. For just like, I want you to not put the same pod on 2 pods on one node. I want to spread as much as possible, and then doing that from a zone perspective for availability zones and whatever cloud that you're using. So I linked in what we use. We just copied into all our deployment templates in our Helm, and I think so. Even pod spreading, or I think it's called pod topology constraint in the new versions of K8s is beta or almost GA, which kind of builds this into Kubernetes by default a little bit. So I would look into that as well. I'll link it here in the channel.
Yeah. Do any of you have any common use cases that you use for affinities? Like, do you have a go-to that you're like, I always set this? Or
like, I can say from an application perspective, like if you think about databases, like Cassandra, for example, you don't want the ring to have more than one pod on a node. And that's when I would set like pod affinity, node affinity, and things like that.
Pierre, you seem to be nodding aggressively. So
I agree completely. Like I said, I try to not run any stateful loads, so my loads don't also burst very much. So I have very well defined resource limits, and so I very rarely see myself using affinity rules. So
good.
But in general, like everything that has been said, I can agree with. And
all right. In the meantime, keep the questions coming. We're now caught up with the second question with D. Bentley following up. Where do you run databases if you're not running them in Kubernetes?
Yeah, outside of Kubernetes, like
I was going to say whatever you've been doing, whatever you were doing before you discovered Kubernetes is fine.
Correct. Like maybe like a managed service from Amazon or like Google, whatever it is that you are on, or like run them on like VMs or bare metal. So really depending on.
Yeah, generally it comes with, again, right, if you want to have co-located databases in the cloud, or where are you going back to your hybrid architecture, where you're coming back to your on-prem, and your database are already the existing databases that cards applications or any other application that's existing already using, right, either Oracle, SQL, or any other databases that's already there as an enterprise, and you're coming back to your connections again to your on-prem data center from the cloud. Then in that cases, definitely your database is out, and you have application workload that's running in AKS or IKS or Azure or somewhere. I mean, in AWS or somewhere. So those scenarios, definitely your cloud is, your application is running somewhere, and your database is running in somewhere, and you're connecting back to the database, and your data is not in production. Now your data is in a layer, not in Kubernetes. So You have more things which you need to take care apart from not from the Kubernetes perspective. You create a PV or PVC and just connect to the data on the on-prem. How are you connecting to either the connectors or to the express routes or anything? So in that cases, you're not worried about your data.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to link this for those of you that are interested in databases and Kubernetes, because we do get a lot of questions about it. Josh Burkis's 3-part series on running Postgres in Kubernetes. Obviously, Kubernetes is the post is 2018, and obviously Kubernetes is advanced since then. But he gives lots of tips there
And
as far as doing database
there's a
stuff.
question for myself and across the panel. Let me post that question. So
Mhm.
if you're running the databases inside the cluster, right? So if you're running any, say for example, the Postgres database itself, so you want to run a single instance of database inside your application and co-locate it inside the deployment, or you want to run an enterprise kind of a small installation of like Postgres on the Kubernetes cluster in a different namespace and want to use that two different applications.
Mhm.
It again depends, but what is the best practice?
I
I
wish
think
Josh was here.
I think if I understood correctly, you're saying, does it make sense to run an actual clustered application, a clustered database within the Kubernetes cluster? Did I understand that correctly?
The cluster database itself, but the database, you want to run your application and database, everything in a single namespace in a kind of single deployment and run your database there, or you want to run database in a different namespace and use the database to multiple applications.
Uh, that depends. I mean, I would say from my perspective, it depends on what your architecture, the cluster architecture is going to look like. I'm
Mhm.
more of a fan of a tiered architecture. So
Okay.
then you're going to separate it by namespaces, and that helps for debugging and just general muck. But
Yeah.
I'm more prefer a tiered architecture.
Yeah, because I keep on getting these questions too. So where to run my database?
Mm.
Either to run with my application as a single instance of a pod, or just run it there, or do you want to
Right.
run as a cluster database, keep it in a different namespace, and just use that as just an endpoint again, use to connect internal from Kubernetes to Kubernetes as a different one.
Mhm.
I guess it also comes down to roles and responsibilities. So if you have teams that are able to run their own databases and their own database hosts and deployments, why not do it this way? In general, for me, I would like to have a standardized way of deploying my database and have it like defined for everyone that is consuming database loads. So I would also go with this tiered architecture where you have database, you have like a base infrastructure layer, Kubernetes databases, and so on, and then you have a second layer, which is basically uh, your application workloads. So
Mm.
yeah.
Some people choose to do it differently. So I see somebody is saying in the Slack channel saying everything should be in one namespace, and some architectures make sense to do that. Uh,
Mm.
I have found that it's become problematic when you have everything in one namespace. Tiered architecture has just been easier to manage, not only from an administrative standpoint, but just from a cluster-wide standpoint.
Mhm.
Yeah, and again, it depends on variety of situations where your enterprise, how you want to run your like as you said, the tiered architecture. It depends. It completely depends on enterprise. If you're trying to move an enterprise database into Kubernetes and you're trying to run as a cluster that's like shared cluster to multiple applications, I understand. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
I'll add one more thing, and that is the choice of which to do really depends on a lot of factors. Things such as the size of your team. Maybe you're a super small shop and everybody's just like, put it all in one namespace and let's manage it that way. It really depends on a lot of factors.
Mm. All right, I do want to. I want to move back to this because I think Q brings up an awesome point. That's more of a general DevOps question. Affinities, anti-affinities, requests, resources. They're all amazing ideas, but it feels like we have so many pods and teams. It's sort of an impossible challenge to actually set anything that just doesn't kill your stuff when it shouldn't. I feel like autoscaling is going to make more sense. Not about the tools and more about the organizational challenge of having a huge number of people all working in the same environment. So, question for all of you: we're a large team. Everyone has different requests of what they want running on the cluster. right? Marky, you're going to ask me how much RAM my app needs, and I'm going to lie to you and just say, give me the most amount you can give me, right? So, and then you're going to have certain people saying, well, my thing needs to run, spread out across pods. And, the thing you said with the Cassandra cluster needs to be run this way. How did it, this is more of a human question, but how do teams like normalize all this stuff, right? Because you're kind of, you're given all these requirements and then you have to make it fit inside a cluster, right? Or do you do certain things where certain workloads go in a certain cluster because that has special needs compared to other ones? Do you have more general purpose clusters?
So
I feel like you could go on all day with this.
yeah, in large organizations, like I've worked in super large organizations where application profiling is part of the, this is part of the flow. And if you don't have the application profile set as well as the data to back up why you have that application profile, meaning like,
Mhm.
oh, we've tested it here in our dev environment. Here's the requirements. Here's where you can verify that. In a
Right.
small shop, that may not be possible. Setting those types of things, I have feels about that because I think
Yeah.
application profiling should be done from a developer perspective. You should know how your application is going to perform in a given environment, and maybe
Mhm.
it's not the same as prod, but you should be able to mimic something as close to prod as possible to say, "Oh, I've tested it; it needs X, Y, and Z."
Mhm. Mm. And Kelly brings up a great point. Resource quotas are easier to calculate when the app groups have a namespace to themselves.
Yes.
That
So
sounds dope.
There's the tiered architecture right there.
that's that's what I was about to tell. So because we maintain an enterprise cluster for on-prem. We call it as enterprise container as a service. That in that we create an namespaces for each app teams, where you alienate there itself first what you get your compute on your namespace itself. You can just set your compute limits while creating the namespace. If not, again, going down at at pod level also, you can just set your memory and CPU limits, right? So we on architecture, when you have a hybrid nodes kind of VMs and bare metals or anything, depends on what kind of worker nodes you have, right? So if you have a bare
Mhm.
metal worker nodes, like those kind of big nodes which have 50 cores on each and 500 gigs of memory or so, you can run your workload on that as a worker, and you can just lay out your applications across that, all with the metrics already there at namespace level. But if you're running very small workloads and like VMs with 4 by 16 or 4 by 32 or something like that, namespace, again, that namespace is the first limit. And again, with the pod affinities, maintaining that your work application X workload should not go to other than 2 nodes or something like that. So
Mhm.
again, node labels and setting up the limits there.
Q goes on to say, we have profiling, but the reality is that this just change over time. It's always a moving target. We don't have an auto updating feature. I could have sworn, Marky, tell me if I'm wrong, that there was a feature somewhere as far as being able to adjust limits based on changing metrics. Am I
I
crazy?
believe there is.
Like some,
I will also add
There
one of
is a
the
Git.
things in terms of in terms of application profiling and drift, and I think that's what Q is kind of getting to, that profile drifting over time.
Mhm.
Uh, that happens, and that's really where when you have a profile, there should be regular sort of syncs where you look back at that profile and does it still meet the same criteria. I understand that that's not for everybody, and they don't sometimes have time to do that. But where
Right.
you'll
Like,
find that you paint yourself into a corner, and I've been part of this, is you start having an application that has no profile. Now let's just say you're in AWS or GKE, and then you're starting to spin up new resources to support this sort of ever-growing application. And at some
mhm.
point, the CFO is going to come to you and say, "Why the hell's the bills so high?" And then you'll see there'll start to be an artificial lockdown, and then you'll start to have to profile that application better over time. So it's
Mm.
best to do that up front and constantly monitor where we're drifting.
do you, do you have a generic policy? Like every time the app team makes a release, they reprofile, or do you do it by
In
time
large
or?
organizations, it's been
Yeah.
every major release. There'll be a revision of a revisiting of the application profile, and that has to be done before the release. Again, I know that's not possible for all
Right.
situations.
Right. And those of you in chat, if you have tips on how you do this, that would be great. Bray adds a link here to the vertical pod autoscaler. Let's see. And Pierre, you've linked to this thing called Goldilocks. What's the TLDR on this one?
Basically, it's a tool that helps you to get your request and resource limits just right. So it looks at them in the past and basically works on actual metrics and gives you also some kind of alerting, as far as I know. I have not used it yet, but I'm planning on using it in the near future, at least.
Yeah, I was just gonna actually, I'm looking at installing it like in the next week or so for our clusters. Our big thing here, and kind of this flows into what you guys were saying. We enable our service teams, our service owners, as much as possible, and this flows into the whole operator kind of construct of like provide them an annotation to enable something, provide them some sort of templating that they can use, provide them the tooling so that if they need something custom, they can get it and they can get it easily without having to bother your operations, DevOps team, et cetera. I think the big thing for us is our service teams have no clue why resources are important at all. They just want to deploy their code. And providing them Goldilocks is going to be a huge burden off of us who have kind of one by one gone through services and tried to apply these because we can give them a recommendation of what it should be. And actually VPA, you can have it in action mode or execute mode where it actually applies those for you. And so we might go and do that and see how well we can trust it. And then based off that, you can tune your HBA on CPU and memory as well and kind of have that work in tandem. So we're kind of down in the resource weeds, but I think the core thing to learn here is that like providing the utility to have other people make the decisions in a safe sort of way and understand what those decisions, the impact they have on their services for what they're trying to do is a huge part of this. Like if you look at the board papers from Google and the early days of doing this stuff, it's all about giving the users, the developers, flexibility on their workloads. So,
I actually also have a question: are people actually using resource limits based on namespaces? I've never used them. I have very rigid rules for pods and deployments, but never used them for namespaces. Like in the end, I just scale up and just look at it. Hey, we are currently. I have like artificial alerts based on namespaces. So if a namespace is consuming X amount of memory or CPU, then I get an alert and say, hey, we have a high consumption there.
Your dog. I'm sorry, Marky, but your dog clearly has an opinion on the vertical pod autoscaler.
I've done it both ways. In it depending upon when a team is requesting to put an application in the cluster. I've been in shops where there's been the idea of tenancy, whether that's shared tenancy or dedicated tenancy. So how they get that deployed. If it's a shared tenancy, then there will be a namespace. It's all about your policies and how you're looking to do things. So if somebody says, I want to deploy this Cassandra cluster and I want to do it in a shared namespace, we're going to lock that namespace down because we don't want them to take down the cluster. But if they're in a dedicated cluster or tenancy, then we'll be more relaxed on the policies. I've done, again, both.
Yeah, completely agree with that.
Try not to move your dog. That's perfect. Keep that there. All right. Anything else on resource and limits and stuff? I'll give the chat. Let's see. Let's see if anybody else has a chat. I see someone who dropped a link there from the OpenShift folks on VPA. Kelly, we'll get to your question in a second. Let's see what else we got. Anything more to say about Goldilocks, Pierre? You've been using it so far? Thumbs up. You're muted.
I've tested it. I just have not used it in production yet, so I have very minimal experience. But I know it works, and it works well enough that I am planning to adapt it. But I also had like an experience blow up in my face yesterday with Quay being down, so I'm kind of a little bit more scary right now, or scared at least. Basically, I try to have like super short-lived nodes and have them like rescheduled every hour. So get one node out, get a new one in, and have like a nice rotation. But yeah, with Quay being down, like lots of pods could not be scheduled because
Question for the panel and the audience. You could just write in Slack or whatever. I'm just curious of what how the past few days have been for people as far as decoupling their deployments from a public service. Like, Are you going to proxy stuff now? Are you just going to be like, you know, it's a SaaS, but they're running it way better than I would myself anyway. I'm sure those of you running very large clusters always have your on-prem things, but I'm just curious how that has affected you. But let's hit that after Cully's question, which is, what are your opinions on node groups in multiple availability zones? Should node groups just be on one AZ? Pros, cons. I have EKS and 3 availability zones, and therefore each NG has 3 AZs.
That's interesting. So I see it both ways. If you're doing cluster autoscaler, it's preferred that you have a node group per zone. You don't do one node group that spans. We actually do one node group that spans, and we disable the AZ rebalance function. I can't talk with ASGs. And cluster autoscaler works just fine in that manner because of the churn. Each zone might not have exactly 33, 33%, but it's close enough for our needs. And the kind of added burden of doing a node group per zone really doesn't make sense. Now, I'm not considering things like your storage requirements per zone, right? You need to look at EFS or EBS, and based on those are specific to a zone. So your data might just be sitting in A and not C, right? And so you might have requirements around that. But I think those two models are kind of the ones I see that are most common. But I think having three individual node groups, each one that's in 3 zones, it doesn't really seem like it makes a lot of sense. I think the core thing here is like having nodes in the cluster that are in each zone. Like that is the core thing of like, I want to be safe in case one zone dies. The other thing to consider here that most people don't realize is that by default, you only have one NAT gateway in one zone for egress. So pods going out, or the runtime going out to get a Docker image, right? Or your instances that are calling out to the internet for something, or a third party. If A goes down and your NAT gateway is in A, you're not going to be able to go out to the internet. So that's definitely something you need to consider. There's high availability NAT gateways that you can do now, and EKS CTL supports that as well. So yeah, it definitely depends on your environment, depends on what you're trying to achieve, depends on the cluster overall health, life cycle, auto scaling, storage, things like that. So.
Anybody else have opinions on this one? And then Jim Angel has a question. Your question will be next. Jim, welcome back. All right. Tim Hunter says, thank goodness for big corporate firewalls. I didn't even notice K was down. They catch it through Nexus, which if someone could drop a link to Nexus for the show notes, that'd be great. Looks like Q has their own proxy that they customized made.
Yeah, but at American also, we just do the same thing. We proxy through the Nexus repository. So we don't directly go through Quay, but either we use a Docker trusted registry, a DTR that's proxying through, or a Nexus repository that's for the pipelines and everything. We proxy through that to Quay. We don't
And I know it's a thing I'm supposed to know, but is it Key or Quay? I thought it was Key. I don't know. I should have been paying attention.
No, I mean, I just no, it's the correct one, but yeah, I think someone has posted the SonarQube. Yeah, the Sonar.
Awesome, good to know.
Yeah,
I mean, for me, for me, it was actually a nice experience to see it blowing up and then basically, oh yeah, we have a weakness in our cluster operation. So since it only was a dev environment for me, actually, I'm not super worried. So I just have to adjust, and maybe for the first step, I move everything to Elastic Container Registry or something. But yeah, let's see.
Oh, and Q mentions that he's not running a proxy. They have this thing called Keppel, which is a regionally federated multi-tenant container image registry, and he's plopped that link. Sorry, they plopped that link in the Slack. That is good to know. We'll make sure that hits the show notes. Thanks. How about you, Mario? You were next. You had a.
I was just going to say, Quay going down, we ceased deployments for basically the entire day yesterday. So we have no caching. I've never really heard of this Nexus stuff. So like we've been thinking a lot. We're actually thinking about getting off of Quay. The original reason we went to it was for the security scanning. We don't really need that anymore. That's almost kind of a baseline now across most container services. But however, we are thinking of local scale or local caching and what that might look like. So because we can't really have that sort of thing. There's always constant churn. We're always deploying. There's always things going down, inflating back up. We need to be able to pull images. So yeah, thanks for the links, everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Anything else before we move on to Jim's question? I feel this is one of those learning moments where like, before you were knee deep into this stuff, it seemed like an obvious thing that you would, always make sure that you can deploy and not depend on third-party services. But then in the real world, you find yourself in the situation where it's like, wow, I need to
For
like
me,
check more stuff, right?
For me, for example, we cache application dependencies, so like node packages and so on. Like, but we don't cache Docker containers for some reason.
Right.
So yeah, definitely something learned. So
yeah, and it's like, and then you fix all that, and then you like realize you didn't cache your operating system updates, so then something else breaks. It's just
right.
I just find that it's very interesting that like to this day here we are, and things like this really actually affect us in real life. Where like in your brain you're like, I thought this was like DevOps rule number one, right? Like make sure all your dependencies can deploy, blah 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 blah, and just what you read in the book and then what you're experiencing, I always think is very interesting. So thanks for your insights there. And Jim says, yeah, lesson learned into your on-prem cache goes down. Yeah, it's that. Speaking of Jim, welcome back to the show. We has a question. Anyone using Vault/KMS seamlessly in CI/CD or GitOps with Kubernetes? Using Vault Agent Auto Auth, mutating webhooks, or anything like that? Anyone have any opinions here or experience? Pierre noped out as fast as he could.
I guess we just got Vault. Another team member of mine just got Vault set up just as a service. We're working on getting secrets. Our main thing is getting secrets that are passed into services secured there instead of using. Right now, we use a client-side tool called SOPs from Mozilla, which does encryption with a KMS key, and then those are pushed to a repo. That is gross. And well, it's not gross. It's a lot more overhead than we'd like to deal with, and getting developers to use it is tedious, and et cetera, et cetera. We can go on and on. So yeah, we haven't gotten to like the more advanced things. Our core thing is secrets management, getting them out of repos, or making sure they're not going into repos, and then ensuring they're safe within the cluster and within the pods. So
maybe someone can help me with this, but how are you getting your secrets into Vault?
So there's an API and a UI, as far as I can tell, that developers are going to work with, and they can tap into that to get them in. I don't know exactly. We're still working on like the best ways for that, the best patterns, etc. So definitely look for more from that, or feel free to ask me in the future. But I'm not 100% in that project as well, so I have to kind of touch base and see what's the latest there. So.
Q says we use Vault, but don't pay attention to it. I just fill in what I need it to. Any other opinions? We might have time for one more question if someone has a quick one while I get the.
Yeah, I mean, we use HashiCorp Vault, and if it is on cloud, we just with the for Azure. If it is like for default Vault, which we go and use it, but we manually key in the secrets once like an AD account is generated. We just get the password but we key in, and manually we key in there, and then we use that Vault. But yeah, we don't have any APIs kind of such. But that's like an interesting idea, Mario. I think we need to think about just keying in with the API inside that.
All right, hold on. Just figuring out the raffle. Okay, we got the raffle winners. Anything else before we wrap up? Audience, last chance to type in tools, URLs. Any last questions? I've got our raffle winners. We appreciate everyone joining today. When we're done today, panel, stick around. I got stuff for you. Kelly asks, so does Vault implement the secrets interface for Kubernetes? This will be our last question of the day. How does this integrate?
I can't really answer that myself. We're not using we're not using Kubernetes secrets now, right? We're going straight to Vault. I don't know if there's probably some provider that can do that or some operator or something. I don't think we have that installed. So
Yeah, maybe I'll check back on that and I'll post some links there, Marky, for now. George.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. And as always, we encourage everyone to stick around to the channel. If you have questions throughout the month, we'll whack them in there and we'll get to them. So with that, it's time for the raffle. We are wrapping up. I'd like to thank everyone for listening in. Great session. We had over 150 of you listening in on a live stream, and we always appreciate your support. Our t-shirt winners are Nathan and Kelly. I will PM both of you after this, and I'll give you a little code. You can go to store.cncf.io, get your Kubernetes shirt, and then apply that code. It'll set the price to $0. We give away 2 shirts every session, so please come back to win a shirt, or you can just buy one on there. The CNCF store has many dope items, including this, my favorite hat. So definitely check that out. And as always, thanks to the CNCF for sponsoring these t-shirt giveaways. We always appreciate any last comments from panel while I check the chat one last time.
I would like to say thank you to everybody, the panelists, as well as all the guests asking questions. Super awesome.
Yes, thank you. And thank the dog. Where's the dog? Bring the dog back in while we outro. Mario, Pierre, Samu, any last final words?
I just want to say, yeah, very great time as always. Like I said, we are planning the Ingress office hours in the first week of June. So if you have any questions that are particularly related to Ingress, we have SIG networking people joining this session, and you can fire away your question, and then you have like a platform to ask like very specific.
And as always, this show is the third Wednesday of every month with our 2 sessions, one for the EU, one for the West Coast. This is the last one of the day. This is the West Coast. So with that, thanks everybody. We hope this was valuable for you. Please share, like, and subscribe. I was waiting for that one. And let us know how we're doing. We always appreciate feedback from the community and hope this is useful for you. So with that, we'll see everyone in a month. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.